In July 1944, as German forces braced for the heavy Sherman tanks they expected to see roaring through the European countryside, they were instead met by a different kind of adversary, the nimble and swift M8 Greyhound armored cars. These vehicles, with their six-wheeled design and light armor, became the eyes and ears of the Allied forces, leading the charge across occupied territories. What the Germans didn't anticipate was that this seemingly modest reconnaissance vehicle would fundamentally alter the pace and nature of modern warfare, proving that speed and intelligence could triumph over brute force. The M8 Greyhound didn't just scout enemy positions, it redefined what it meant to control the battlefield. In the rolling hills of Normandy, as panzer crews strained their eyes looking for the distinctive silhouette of American heavy armor, they found themselves outmaneuvered by a vehicle that could appear and disappear like a ghost, gathering crucial intelligence and striking where least expected. This wasn't the war they had prepared for, and the psychological impact of facing an enemy that seemed to be everywhere at once would prove as devastating as any artillery barrage. The story of the M8 Greyhound begins not in the factories of Detroit, but in the harsh lessons learned during the early years of World War II. American military planners, watching the lightning-fast German blitzkrieg tactics tear through Europe, realized that traditional reconnaissance methods were woefully inadequate for modern warfare. The horse-mounted cavalry units and slow-moving scout vehicles that had served in previous conflicts were simply too vulnerable and too slow for the rapid pace of mechanized combat. What was needed was a vehicle that could match the speed of advancing tank columns while providing real-time intelligence to commanders. The specifications called for something unprecedented, a wheeled armored vehicle capable of highway speeds, armed well enough to defend itself, yet light enough to avoid detection. When Ford Motor Company received the contract in 1942, they faced a seemingly impossible challenge, creating a vehicle that could be fast, protected, and reliable all at once. The engineering team, led by Chief Designer Harold Youngren, knew they were designing more than just another military vehicle. They were creating the future of battlefield reconnaissance. The M8 Greyhound that rolled off Ford's assembly lines was a marvel of wartime engineering efficiency. Weighing 17,200 pounds and powered by a 110 horsepower Hercules JXD gasoline engine, this six-wheeled armored car could reach speeds of up to 56 miles per hour on roads, faster than most tanks of its era. Its armor, though only 0.75 inches thick at its strongest points, was strategically angled to deflect small arms fire and shell fragments. The vehicle's primary armament consisted of a 37mm M6 gun mounted in an open-topped turret, supplemented by a 50 caliber M2 machine gun for anti-aircraft and anti-personnel duties. But the real innovation lay in its drivetrain. The M8 featured a sophisticated 6x6 wheel configuration with independent front suspension, allowing it to maintain high speeds over rough terrain that would bog down tracked vehicles. The crew of four, commander, gunner, driver, and radio operator, worked in a cramped but efficiently designed interior that prioritized communication equipment and ammunition storage. With a range of 350 miles on a single tank of fuel, the Greyhound could operate far behind enemy lines for extended periods, making it the perfect tool for deep reconnaissance missions. Production of the M8 Greyhound began in earnest in 1943, with Ford's River Rouge plant retooling its assembly lines to accommodate this new type of warfare machine. The company's experience in mass production, honed through decades of automobile manufacturing, proved invaluable in meeting the military's urgent demands. By the time production ceased in 1945, Ford had delivered 8,523 M8 Greyhounds to the U.S. military and Allied forces, a testament to American industrial capacity during wartime. Each vehicle cost approximately $58,000 to produce, equivalent to only $850,000 in today's currency, making it significantly more expensive than a standard Jeep, but far cheaper than a tank. The production line operated with clockwork precision. Skilled workers could assemble a complete M8 in just 12 hours, with final testing and quality control adding another 4 hours to the process. Quality control was paramount. Each vehicle underwent rigorous testing, including high-speed runs, armor penetration tests, and mechanical stress evaluations before being approved for shipment overseas. The vehicles were then carefully crated and loaded onto Liberty ships, bound for European and Pacific theaters, where they would soon prove their worth in the crucible of combat. The M8 Greyhound's combat debut came during the Italian campaign in late 1943, where its speed and agility immediately set it apart from other reconnaissance vehicles. Unlike the lumbering half-tracks and vulnerable jeeps that had previously served in scouting roles, the Greyhound could race ahead of advancing infantry, probe enemy defenses, and retreat to safety before enemy forces could effectively respond. Captain James Morrison of the 91st Cavalry Reconnaissance Squadron later wrote in his diary, "The Greyhound changed everything about how we fought. We could be 10 miles ahead of our main force, gathering intelligence that would have taken days to obtain through traditional methods." The vehicle's psychological impact on enemy forces was equally significant. German soldiers reported feeling constantly watched and harassed by these fast-moving scouts that seemed to appear from nowhere. In the mountainous terrain of Italy, where traditional tanks struggled with narrow roads and steep grades, the M8's superior mobility allowed Allied forces to maintain constant pressure on retreating German units. The vehicle's radio equipment, more sophisticated than anything available in previous reconnaissance vehicles, enabled real-time communication between forward scouts and artillery units, dramatically improving the accuracy and effectiveness of Allied fire support. As Allied forces prepared for the D-Day landings, the M8 Greyhound was assigned a crucial role in the post-invasion phase. Military planners recognized that the success of Operation Overlord would depend not just on establishing a beachhead, but on rapidly expanding inland before German reinforcements could arrive. The Greyhound's speed made it the perfect vehicle for this mission. It could race through the Norman countryside, identifying enemy strongpoints and finding gaps in German defenses that heavier forces could exploit. On June 12, 1944, just 6 days after the initial landings, M8 Greyhounds of the 4th Cavalry Group became the first Allied vehicles to reach the outskirts of Carentan, a strategically vital town that controlled access to the Cotentin Peninsula. The psychological effect on German defenders was immediate and profound. They had expected weeks to prepare their defenses, but suddenly found Allied reconnaissance units probing their positions within days of the invasion. Staff Sergeant Robert Chen, a radio operator in an M8 crew, recalled, "We could see the surprise in their faces when we appeared. They weren't ready for us to be there so soon." This rapid advance capability would prove decisive in preventing German forces from establishing strong defensive lines inland from the beaches. The true test of the M8 Greyhound's capabilities came during the breakout from Normandy in late July 1944. As Allied forces finally punched through German defensive lines in Operation Cobra, M8 units were tasked with exploiting the breakthrough and maintaining contact with retreating enemy forces. The vehicle's 350-mile range allowed it to operate far ahead of supply lines, while its speed enabled crews to cover vast distances in a single day. On July 30, 1944, an M8 crew from the 6th Armored Division's Reconnaissance Battalion covered an astounding 127 miles in 14 hours, leapfrogging from one German position to another and radioing back vital intelligence about enemy movements. This information allowed Allied commanders to redirect their main forces toward the most promising avenues of advance, accelerating the collapse of German resistance in western France. The Greyhound's ability to maintain this pace day after day proved crucial. While German forces attempted to establish new defensive lines, M8 crews were already scouting their positions and identifying weaknesses. Lieutenant Colonel William Hayes, commanding the 86th Cavalry Reconnaissance Squadron, noted in his after-action report, "The M8 gave us the ability to think and act faster than the enemy. We were always one step ahead because we could see what they were doing before they finished doing it." Perhaps nowhere was the M8 Greyhound's impact more dramatically demonstrated than during the liberation of Paris in August 1944. As Allied forces raced toward the French capital, M8 units of the 4th Armored Division served as the spearhead, navigating through the complex network of roads and bridges surrounding the city. The vehicle's speed allowed them to reach the outskirts of Paris hours ahead of the main force, where they made contact with French resistance fighters who provided crucial intelligence about German defensive positions. On August 24, 1944, an M8 crew commanded by Lieutenant Robert Patterson became the first Allied military unit to enter central Paris, arriving at the Hôtel de Ville nearly 6 hours before the official liberation ceremony. The psychological impact of this achievement extended far beyond military considerations. Newsreel footage of the sleek, fast-moving Greyhounds racing through Parisian streets became an iconic symbol of Allied victory and technological superiority. French civilians who had endured 4 years of occupation were amazed by these vehicles that seemed to embody the speed and efficiency of American industrial might. Marie Dubois, a Parisian shopkeeper, later recalled, "When we saw those American cars racing through our streets, we knew the war was truly ending. They moved like nothing we had ever seen, like the future itself had arrived to liberate us." The M8 Greyhound's versatility extended far beyond its primary reconnaissance role, adapting to meet the diverse challenges of global warfare. In the Pacific theater, where jungle terrain and island-hopping campaigns presented unique obstacles, the vehicle proved equally valuable. On Luzon in the Philippines, M8 units of the 7th Cavalry Regiment used their speed to outflank Japanese defensive positions, often appearing behind enemy lines before defenders realized they had been bypassed. The vehicle's relatively lightweight, crucial for operations on temporary bridges and damaged infrastructure, allowed it to cross structures that couldn't support heavier tanks. In the European theater, creative commanders found new uses for the Greyhound's capabilities. Some units removed the turrets to create fast command vehicles, while others modified them for specialized roles like artillery spotting and medical evacuation. The M20 variant, which eliminated the turret entirely in favor of additional radio equipment and passenger space, became particularly popular among reconnaissance units that needed to transport intelligence personnel and captured documents quickly back to headquarters. Technical Sergeant Michael O'Brien, who served with a modified M8 unit in Germany, explained, "We could do things with that vehicle that nobody had ever thought of. It wasn't just a scout car, it was whatever we needed it to be." As the war in Europe entered its final phase in early 1945, the M8 Greyhound faced its ultimate test during the crossing of the Rhine River and the subsequent advance into Germany. The vehicle's speed became even more critical as Allied forces raced to prevent German forces from establishing new defensive lines or destroying vital infrastructure. M8 units were among the first Allied vehicles to cross the Rhine at Remagen on March 7, 1945, immediately fanning out to secure the bridgehead and prevent German counterattacks. The psychological impact on German civilians was profound. The sight of these fast-moving American vehicles racing through their towns and cities drove home the reality that the war was lost. Obergefreiter Hans Müller, a German soldier captured near Cologne, later told interrogators, "When we saw those American reconnaissance cars everywhere, moving so fast, we knew there was no point in fighting anymore. They were like ghosts. You never knew where they would appear next." The M8's role in the final collapse of German resistance cannot be overstated. By maintaining constant pressure on retreating forces and preventing the establishment of new defensive lines, these vehicles helped ensure that Germany's surrender came months earlier than it might have otherwise. The war that had begun with horse-mounted cavalry was ending with wheeled scouts that could cover more ground in a day than traditional reconnaissance units could manage in a week. The M8 Greyhound service with international Allied forces added another dimension to its remarkable wartime record. Perhaps most notably, the Brazilian Expeditionary Force, FEB, employed M8s during their operations in the Italian campaign, where the vehicles proved perfectly suited to the mountainous terrain and rapid tactical movements required in that theater. Brazilian crews, many of whom had never operated armored vehicles before the war, quickly mastered the Greyhound's capabilities and used them to great effect during the Gothic Line offensive in late 1944. Capitão João Silva of the Brazilian 1st Reconnaissance Squadron wrote, "The M8 gave us mobility we never dreamed possible. In the mountains of Italy, where tanks struggled, we could move like the wind." British and Free French forces also operated M8s, often modifying them to suit their specific tactical requirements and communication systems. The vehicle's adaptability to different military doctrines and operational environments demonstrated the soundness of its basic design. Even Soviet forces, typically reluctant to adopt Western equipment, requested M8 Greyhounds through the Lend-Lease program for use in their rapid advances through Eastern Europe. The international success of the M8 proved that effective military design transcends national boundaries. A good vehicle is a good vehicle regardless of which flag it flies under. The legacy of the M8 Greyhound extends far beyond its impressive wartime service record, fundamentally influencing the development of armored reconnaissance vehicles for decades to come. Its combination of speed, protection, and firepower established the template for modern armored cars, while its operational success proved the value of wheeled vehicles in roles traditionally assigned to tracked armor. Post-war analysis revealed that M8 units had achieved reconnaissance objectives with casualty rates significantly lower than comparable tracked vehicles, while covering far greater distances and providing more timely intelligence. The vehicle's influence can be seen in subsequent American designs, like the M706 Commando, and modern vehicles like the LAV-25, all of which trace their conceptual lineage back to the Greyhound. International militaries took note as well. The British developed the Saladin armoured car, based partly on lessons learned from M8 operations, while French and German post-war designs incorporated many of the Greyhound's innovations. Perhaps most importantly, the M8 demonstrated that in modern warfare, information and mobility could be more valuable than heavy armour and massive firepower. As General Omar Bradley noted in his post-war memoirs, the M8 Greyhound taught us that seeing the enemy first and moving faster than he could react was often more important than hitting harder than he could hit back. It changed how we thought about reconnaissance and ultimately how we thought about war.